One of the key things that we've been doing at IBM Storage now for actually several years is very focused on two key aspects, which tie right into IBM's corporate initiatives. The first one is hybrid cloud. We've been talking about hybrid cloud since 2015 and had solutions that were hybrid cloud in 2015 and have spread now across our entire portfolio. So whether that be the system level, our software-defined storage, all has, if you will, hybrid cloudiness built into it. So we've been continuing to extend and expand that. And in fact, just a couple weeks ago, just last week, in fact, we introduced a new product that takes that even further. Then the second area that's been very critical for us has been AI. So as you know, AI applications, analytics, and big data are all super sensitive to storage performance. If the storage isn't fast enough, then the AI workloads and applications don't function properly. So what we've done is create a system with our Spectrum scale, our elastic storage server, excuse me, and the product that we announced last week, Spectrum Fusion, to make sure we can provide that right foundation for AI, analytic, and big data workloads. So those have been key things that we've had, and they're obviously now key themes of IBM. Now IBM views the world a hybrid cloud, some data on-prem, some data off-prem, and then clearly AI. Now we've also taken a little bit further on the storage side. In addition to supporting the AI applications and workloads, we've actually embedded AI technology inside of our own solutions to make them easier to use, easier to manage, and more efficient from an end user perspective. So that's kind of the high level trends that we see at IBM and what we've woven into the technology and into the products that we've got. So we've made sure that we've integrated all this technology across everything, whether it be storage systems such as our elastic storage system, whether it be our flash system, all flash array products, what we've done with software-defined storage, file, block, and object. We've also made sure that we've integrated it into our backup technology. So our Spectrum Protect and Spectrum Protect Plus, we've made capable of backing up across hybrid clouds, moving data back and forth. In fact, from a Protect and Protect Plus perspective, we probably have 40 to 50 small public cloud providers, small and mid-size all over the world, where their engine for their backup as a service they offer to end users is actually built on Protect or Protect Plus. And then the last trend has been really about containers. The integration of containers, as you know, most of the hybrid clouds have gone container-based. We started having container technology and support from our perspective back in early 2016. So there's now a spec called the CSI spec that all the storage vendors adhere to, but in 2016 there was not. So we actually made sure that our flash products and our Spectrum virtualized software-defined storage, which comes on those flash products, and then our Spectrum Scale for scale-out file and the elastic storage system that has Spectrum Scale embedded if you want to buy it that way, because you can buy our products as software-defined storage or embedded in a system solution. So we started doing persistent storage for containers in 16, then the CSI specification came out. So we support that, and we support that across the portfolio, including, again, in our backup technology. And we've just introduced a fully container-native product called Spectrum Fusion. So that's what we've done from a high level and from a strategy perspective. For us, it's all about, of course, making it easier to use for the end user. It's all about keeping costs down. So obviously that's a big issue, is making sure that we can keep the costs down. And then we want to make sure that it's also easy to deploy and implement from a partner perspective. If you look at us, we do globally about 70% of our revenue through our ecosystem partners. So we want to make sure that whatever we do from an end user perspective is easily deployable from their perspective. We train them, we certify them, of course, and we make sure that we can get all that implemented across the applications, workloads, and use cases, whether it be on-prem or off-prem. The one other trend that we're starting to see, which is what Spectrum Fusion, which we announced last Tuesday, does, is seamlessly span edge, core, and cloud. So the containerization helps do that. You can build it anywhere and deploy it anywhere. Um, you see a lot of collection of edge data starting, particularly in the telco space and in other areas. And by the way, what's considered the edge, for example, if I'm a global manufacturer, then my factories actually could be the edge, right? Because if it's a large factory in the automotive space and the semiconductor space, those factories cost over $1 billion US just to build. So they're not running everything from core data center, right? They've got robotics, same thing in the healthcare space, particularly in pharma. So there are a number of areas now where things are being roboticized. So there's a very large compute infrastructure at the edge. So we see that having software that can span that seamlessly and move data back and forth and have all of the users be able to access regardless of where it is a real advantage.
A lot of people had thought things would be temporary, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, but I think now this is the new normal. This is the way forward. So, I'd like to maybe evaluate in the last 1.5 years, what are the trends that have become permanent now? Now there's no going back. Is there something we'll go back, and what are the general technology trends you say, okay, now this is it, we are not going back?
Sure. So first of all, of course, is digital transformation has accelerated. Everyone was moving there anyway, but now everyone is going digital, right? If you're in retail and you're not Amazon, obviously you already was clearly online, but if you're someone who is in the middle, you've had to transition very heavily to that. And you've seen that in some of the stock reports on the retail side of who's done a good job of it and who has not done a good job of that. So with that, digital transformation comes a couple key things. First of all is availability. You have to have data availability and data resilience. Things can't go down, and obviously as you're doing more and more transactions, what I'll say, beyond your firewall, okay, they're subject to malware and ransomware. So we've incorporated malware and ransomware technology and the ability to recover rapidly if there is a malware or ransomware attack in many of our products, such as our Safeguard copy, and also we have malware and ransomware detection in our Spectrum Protect backup product that'll detect anomalous activity. Because obviously, if you're going to do malware or ransomware, you have to go to the backup copies first, the secondary data first, because the primary data you're going to try to hold for ransom. But of course, I could just say, I'm not paying you any money. I'll just recover from a known good backup or a known good snapshot. So you've got to be able to manage that secondary storage as well as the primary to keep it safe. So you got availability, meaning you got to be up and running at all times. So for example, with our new flash system entry products we announced in February, even our lowest end product has 6 nines of availability, which is only 5 minutes of downtime in a full 365 by 24 by 7 year. So availability and resilience. The other thing you need, of course, is agility, and that comes really about 2 things. One, hybrid cloud support, being able to go back and forth, move the data seamlessly, and that includes multiple clouds, not just one cloud. So IBM Storage in particular, we don't work just with IBM Cloud, we work with Google, we work with Amazon, we work with Azure, and you've probably seen some of the analyst reports talking about how, when you're talking the global Fortune 2000, they're not going to use one cloud provider anyway, they're going to use multiple cloud providers, right? So you've got to make sure that you're supporting that. And so we've done that as well on the hybrid cloud side. And of course, related to that is containers for 2 reasons. One, containers are much easier to get rid of than virtual machines. And if you don't have persistent storage, then when you get rid of the container, you literally just got rid of the data associated with the container that you got rid of, which doesn't happen in a virtual environment, right? Virtual environments are stateful. So when you throw away the virtual machine, you still got the data. That's not how containers were originally designed. So you have to have that support, as part of this agility, because part of the agility from the software side, not from the storage side, is to design anywhere and be able to deploy anywhere with the microservices. So you got to make sure that you support that and can handle that as they add more containers and get rid of containers, which is, again, much easier to do. So that persistence of storage is a big, big deal. We think cost is a big factor now. So before, yes, there was always high-end, mid-range, and entry product lines, but at any one of those classes of product, people are much more price sensitive. So as an example, with our Spectrum Fusion product that we announced last week, spanning core, edge, and cloud, you can have just 1 copy of the data. That's it. So it doesn't mean you can't have 25 different data sets, but each data set has 1 copy. Whereas historically, you would need 4 copies of this data set, 5 copies of that, 6. So that creates silos often, which means the AI, the analytics don't work right, because if you don't catch every silo, then you don't get what you need to do your AI workload or your analytics workload properly. The other factor of that is increased management from the end user perspective, and that means cost, operational expense, and then capital expense. If I've got 10 copies of data set A and 20 copies of data set B and 30 copies of data set C, I'm buying all kinds of storage I don't really need. So with Spectrum Fusion, and also a feature of our Spectrum Scale product, you can have one copy of data across core, edge, and cloud, one copy. Now you need one other copy for obviously disaster protection. But other than that, from a primary storage perspective, you only need one copy. So that's very, very unique and very, very different. But again, the focus there is cutting CapEx and OpEx. The second thing we did, of course, around that same theme is to incorporate AI technology inside of our storage. So yes, we're great for AI workloads. We're the right foundation for an AI or analytic workload, but we put AI technology inside. So for example, we have a technology known as Easy Tier, which allows us to tier data from expensive, fast storage to lower cost storage. Well, it's all AI based. You set up the source, you set up the target, point and click, you tell it to go, and then the AI engine inside of our Spectrum virtualized software, which is on our flash system, all flash arrays, automatically moves data back and forth. When it's hot, it puts it to whatever it sees as the fastest storage. And when it's cold, it puts it to the slowest storage, which, as you know, is less expensive. So leveraging that AI technology inside. And then lastly, of course, has been the trend around COVID to implement AI into everything that you do. So your analytics engines, your manufacturing. So those are the big things we see from a COVID perspective. And then obviously everything remote. So yes, some companies have allowed people to go into the data centers, but if they can't, you've got to be able to manage that storage remotely. Okay, so manage the array, manage the software, manage your backup and archiving, but do it all from a storage admin sitting at their home or their apartment, VPNing in and then managing it. And we've had those features way before COVID hit. We've always allowed people to come in, storage management. You could be remote, particularly at IBM, because a lot of our customers had been multiple data centers. So you'd have storage admins sitting in data center 1, okay, in Singapore, managing storage in data center B in India, or guys in India managing storage in the UK, or guys in the UK managing storage in the US. Okay, because it all depends on the data centers that were the bigger ones, you'd have more storage admins, right, guys to manage that storage. So manage it remotely, whether it be something like configuring lungs, setting up how you back up, all that has been part of our strategy pre-COVID. It just happened that COVID then allowed us to really leverage the technology we had for multiple data centers, even for small accounts now, right? That was very focused on, the global Fortune 2000, right? The people with the multiple data centers. But now we don't have to have that anymore. So those are the key trends we think COVID has helped us enable globally.
Okay. So another thing, like you mentioned that you have been, from 2015, you have been doing hybrid cloudiness. And, actually what I was asking is right now, I think it's not a question of whether you are going to come to a cloud, it's when you are going to come to the cloud. Because I think now all the big companies, enterprises, SMBs have now that is the only way forward because of the work from home culture, remote working, disaster management. So maybe if you can speak something about your data services, how is it for enterprises? Especially SMBs are very apprehensive because just now you talked of small accounts. Because I think now the hybrid cloud has to cover the big accounts, small accounts, it has to cover everyone. And the small accounts are very apprehensive, when it comes to transferring their workloads and all that. So maybe if you could speak about your data services and how secure they are, how the enterprises and SMBs will take to them.
Sure. So what we do from a storage perspective is we make sure that everything is always encrypted as you move data back and forth. So we make it seamless. So in fact, with our Spectrum virtualized software that comes on our flash system, we have a full instantiation Spectrum virtualized for public cloud that works with AWS, IBM Cloud, and is in beta right now with Microsoft Azure. And when the on-premise storage is talking to the cloud, it actually thinks it's talking to itself. It's a full version of the exact same software sitting in the cloud provider. that's exactly the same as what's on-prem. So it talks to it, it's essentially talking to itself in two different locations. In the case of our Spectrum Fusion and our Spectrum Scale, we've integrated core, edge, and cloud right into the technology. So in fact, because we do local caching, you don't actually know where the data is necessarily. The storage people do, but you as an end user do not. So we put local caching at the core, the edge, and the cloud. So if I've got a workload, and of course we have file locking to make sure that nothing gets overwritten. So if I'm going to access that, if I'm sitting at the core and it actually is at the cloud, there's a local cache. So that way, when you move data seamlessly back and forth, you don't have a performance issue because the idea is access anywhere across that continuum of edge, core data center, and cloud. So that local caching layer allows us to make sure that we can not have a performance issue, because otherwise you could have a performance issue, right? If you're trying to do, so for example, let's take manufacturing. So if I am making soft drinks, or I'm doing beer, or I'm doing something that's going into the bottle, right, you have giant factories that do that. Of course, you've got to get the bottles ready. You have to clean the bottles. You have to put together whatever that is, soda, juice, whatever. Then you put them in the bottle. Then you have to put the caps on, and obviously many places have the security seal. Then you have to take the bottles and put them into the boxes, then put the boxes onto the pallet and into the truck or onto the train, right? How are you going to move it around? We have a business partner in North America who's actually designed a quality control AI-based system. So it does the quality. Okay, so once the liquid is in the bottle, it's the capping, it's the security seal, it's the boxing, and then it is the putting on the pallet and then the pallet into the truck. And it's all done with video cameras everywhere, but it's AI based. So it learns if they change the process, right? And for some reason, if they had 30 bottles in a box and they change that to 36, well, actually it learns and then knows, okay, 36 can fit in. Otherwise, it would look like you're putting extra bottles in a box that can't handle it, which of course means that the juice, the soda, the water, whatever it is, could get damaged because you have too much physical, right, bottles in a box that doesn't support that. And that's all AI-based technology. So that's a perfect example of how they've leveraged that technology. And they're not, and in this case, they've done it for a small company that does juice, not for Coca-Cola or Pepsi or one of the big vendors. It's literally a local juice company that sells juice probably mostly in the southwest and southeastern part of the US. That's what they do. But they use AI to cut costs and improve quality. So it's a perfect example. And of course, they can go seamlessly, archive all that data. They archive it out to a cloud provider. So the data is on-prem, and then once they're tracking all the quality, they actually archive the video out to a cloud provider, right? And don't leave that on-prem. So that's a perfect example of leveraging that trend, not just for a big company, but in this case, going down to the smaller companies. I do think pretty much everyone is realized it. Tell you an interesting story. So I was talking to a major research hospital in New York, and I knew, so I used to work at a company called EMC, who you're probably familiar with now, Dell, as a senior VP. So I knew the CIO when he was at a bank. So now the CIO goes to this large hospital in New York City, and they do both research and primary care. So we're talking about, the hybrid cloud, this exact conversation. He goes, Eric, we ran some numbers. I said, well, Dave, what did you do? He said, well, we borrowed a guy from finance, and we were thinking about going 100% cloud. So we looked at IBM Cloud, Amazon, and Google. We did all three. And we got pricing for everything. And I said, well, what does everything include? He said, well, first of all, they all give me 4 nines, but if I need 5 nines or 6 nines of availability, they charge me. I get X level performance. When I want better performance, everybody charges me. And then, of course, for highly transactional workloads, a lot of data is going back and forth. I get billed with all the network fees. So he told me that he went to the finance guy at the university. He borrowed a spreadsheet person who was really good at it, and they ran all the numbers. And he said that going 100% cloud was about 25% more expensive. Now, this is someone based in New York, so I'm sure it would vary where you are. 25% more expensive than being on-prem/hybrid. And he said he did it just by purely running the numbers. So I would liken cloud storage actually to the razor and the razor blade. When you buy the razor, it's cheap, right? In the US, it's 8 to 12 US dollars. When you buy the blades, it's 50 to 60 US dollars for the blades. So cloud storage is very much the same. You get the base, okay? But when you want availability guarantees, when you want performance guarantees, want flexibility guarantees, every cloud vendor, including IBM, and I love IBM, I'm an IBM shareholder, I'm wearing my IBM shirt right now, but every cloud vendor, that's part of what they do. And they all do it that way. Amazon, Microsoft, Google, doesn't matter. The small guys do it too, right? Because they all kind of follow the big four cloud providers. So it was an interesting comment. And, they're a big hospital, but they're not like, Cardinal Health or one of the big hospital conglomerates that's, 50, 60 billion US dollars. They're in New York and they're associated actually with the university. So there may be $1 billion US dollars in revenue, maybe, but still. 2 hospitals, all the research, and again, they did their analysis was purely by the financial numbers that had nothing to do with anything else. Then, of course, he was always concerned about how am I really going to get 6 nines of availability? I can control it better on-prem. So he's got a hybrid model. He uses our flash systems, and they're also a customer with our Spectrum Scale and our Spectrum Protect. But they were looking at going 100% cloud. So I don't know how it is in India, but that was the feedback he gave us, was that 100% cloud is actually more expensive than a hybrid configuration.
Like you have mentioned many topics throughout the talk. So one consistent theme is AI. So it's like you have data. You said data and analytics. You need AI for that. Then you are talking of your software defined storage solutions. Even for storage solution, AI is embedded into that. So if you can speak a bit about because I think AI is everywhere there. So how do your AI systems, algorithms work throughout this data storage and services?
Okay, sure. So from the application layer, we make sure that our storage is fast enough to support an AI analytics or big data workload. They're very susceptible to bandwidth of storage, sustained data transfer rates. So what we do is make our systems basically infinitely scalable. So our Spectrum Scale product and our Spectrum Fusion product can literally scale to yottabytes, and we actually have many customers that are at exabytes in production, okay, that truly have an exabyte in production. So that's item one. So that's the workload basis, the foundation that we can support, okay, and that's obviously very important. Second thing, again, is the integration of AI technology into the storage to make it easier to use. So, for example, our Storage Insights, which is a cloud service, it's free. So when you have our mainframe storage and our flash system storage, and we put some elements into Spectrum Fusion, you can look at capacity, you can look at performance, and you can even see bottlenecks that are not related to storage, for example, like a switching bottleneck or a server bottleneck. So that's using AI to analyze the storage system and its associated network, and it would come back to you and say, you seem to have a performance issue. These 3 servers have 16 gigabit fiber channel, and all the others are running 32. So we think that the performance is right there around those 3 servers. Or switch infrastructure, you've got 32 gig switches, but there's one 16 gig switch, which of course is slowing down the network over in that part of the network. So that's AI technology. Before, it used to be literally troubleshooting. It'd be a service technician, right? And it'd be the customer, give me an inventory of what you have, give me literally a printout of a network topology showing the storage, the servers, and any switching infrastructure. And now we can do that all with AI technology, our Storage Insights. So that's an example of using AI embedded in. And then obviously our scalability allows us to support AI and analytic workloads. For example, with Fusion and with Scale, we scale based on the nodes. So for example, with our Elastic Storage System 3200, it supports 80 gigabytes a second bandwidth per node. If you have 10 nodes, you're 800 gigabytes a second sustained bandwidth across the cluster. And if you've got 20, you're at 1.6 terabytes. So if the software, the AI software, really needs a terabyte of performance, we can actually provide that because these things scale out. So we make sure that we provide the right foundation for AI, analytic, and big data workloads and applications, and B, both with Storage Insights or our easy tier technology, what I mentioned earlier, we've embedded AI inside the storage so it's easier to use. And, as you know, the number of storage admins is not up. The capacity is way up, and IT spend is back to where it was, after the 2007, 2008 recession when IT was hit pretty heavily. But when you open up the envelope and look inside, what you see is a lot of DevOps people got hired. So if company X, had 100 storage people before 2008, the layoff hit, they went to 75. Even though their capacity is now 25 times what it was, or 20 times what it was, they still have 75 people. Did they hire 25 new employees after that recession? Absolutely they did, but they're DevOps people or test people. So, if you don't have the AI built into the storage, each storage admin, particularly in the global Fortune 500, they're managing way more storage than they were, back in 08, 09, and 10, but they didn't hire a bunch of storage admins. There's a few exceptions, but in general, when I talk to CIOs all over the world, I say, well, how many storage people did you have, before, there's a recession now, but before that last recession, they say, I had 100. What did you do? I had to go to 75. So you're back up to 100 now, right? Because IT is the one area, obviously, with COVID that actually has had not a bad result. When you look at all the companies, the storage companies done pretty well, networking companies done well. Clearly, all the cloud guys have done well. Microsoft has done well, and Oracle on the software side. So in general, they're not cutting IT headcount, right? But when you ask them, they'll tell you they've hired a bunch of DevOps people or they've hired software developers. So if you don't have AI built into your storage, that's a real issue because they're managing so much more capacity than they did 10 years ago, and they're not going to hire 10 more storage admins. That's just not the way CIOs think these days. And in fact, I've been doing this now for close to 40 years. I've never, ever, ever met anywhere in the world a CIO who used to be a storage admin, not even once. So, they know they need storage, but they're mostly software people these days. And even when there used to be a fair amount of mainframe CIOs, that's how they came up. They knew they needed storage, but it's not like they loved it, right? They weren't storage people. So, you've got to make sure that it's built around ease of use, ease of deployment. That's why building AI inside of the storage is so critical, as well as supporting AI workloads. It's all about, when you think about it, when you're selling storage, what you really need to do is not talk storage speeds and feeds, is talk about how the storage supports their applications, workloads, and use cases. So for example, when I talk to a customer, if they're running SAP, I don't talk about our micro latency, which is, by the way, what allows us to have great performance for SAP. Technically, what I say is, what if we could take that SAP workload from 30 hours to 30 minutes? How about that? Now, that happens to be due to micro latency, but at the same time, it's the CIO is not a storage person. So if you start talking micro latency does this, that, the other thing, we're at 70 mics of latency, they'll stare at you like you're from Mars. But if you talk to them about the SAP workload or the Mongo or Cassandra workload, right, or in the case of AI and big data about your bandwidth, they do know that AI, big data, and analytic workloads are bandwidth sensitive. That they understand, right? But you don't go beyond that with the CIOs because they're mostly software people, and there's nothing wrong with that. Just if you're a storage person, you need to learn how to say the right thing to them. And we've implemented all this technology that is really designed to make the applications and workloads run better. That's been the real focus of what we've been doing globally.
And another point you mentioned was about edge. So talking about edge computing and edge infrastructure, I imagine it's very important for Industry 4.0, the robotized processes you're talking of, smart cities, and maybe you can speak on that. And one thing is, how important is 5G for edge? Because I don't know India, I don't know whether 5G is coming. When it is coming. So can we go to the edge without 5G?
So that really is a function of the network performance, obviously, from a 5G perspective. From a storage perspective, the main thing on the edge is having the right configurations at the edge. So, for example, the seamless data move between core, edge, and cloud, that's a big deal. So if they've got the 5G network, which supports really the application base and is really a function of the networking topology, for us, the main thing is being sure that we can move the data seamlessly, or again, if we have data at the core data center, as an example, the employee who's at the edge, because of our local cache, doesn't realize the data is sitting in the core data center, right? So that seamless experience from an end user perspective is very, very important to us. From a 5G perspective, it's really not so much about the storage. That's more about the networking and does the topology of the overall configuration, the servers, the networks, and the applications, can they function without 5G in that example? But from a storage perspective, we're independent of that, right? For us, it's about availability. It's about seamless data movement. It's about hybrid cloud, right? And being able to have that data at the edge or perceived to be at the edge because of our local caching. So those are things that we need to focus on. But 5G is clearly being trumpeted by people all over, particularly all the telcos, as critical to edge. And I do think we're talking very remote edge. So don't think the car manufacturers, the semiconductor manufacturers, those giant factories are clearly connected, with high-speed links. It's more about, what do I do with a cell tower? What do I do if I'm brick and mortar retail and I've got, a couple stores at the edge? The store basically would be at the edge. Do I use 5G or do I hardwire, right? And so if you can use 5G, you don't have to use the hardwire. That's to your advantage, right? And then clearly things like remotes. So if you buy the super dump truck that you see on TV sometimes on a special where the guy has to climb up three ladders to get to where he sits, those dump trucks cost about 180 million US dollars. So if you're going to have those dump trucks and spend 180 million US dollars, you probably have sensors all over to see if there's something wrong with something, because the repairs on something at 180 million US dollars are not inconsequential. God forbid you get a flat tire. Like, how do you change the flat tire? And how much does that, and I mean a tire that's, let's say, unrepairable. How much does the tire cost? I bet the tire costs $10 million or, $5 million. So in that case, 5G would be critical, because the sensors on something like that, oil rigs, again, small retail, right? Small locations, you might want to be 5G. But from a storage perspective, for us, it's all about, at small edge, having small form factor configurations. So for example, with our flash system 5200, we have a very high performance storage node that's only one rack U. So if it's truly retail, edge, small store, if you will, and in the closet they've got a 1U high server and small storage, right, physically small, we can do that, right? We have that. So that's how we'd support it. But the 5G issue is more about the network infrastructure and less about the storage infrastructure.
Last 1 year we are seeing COVID has created a lot of problems, but I'm seeing all the solutions are coming out of technology. Whether it's remote work, whether it's drones, whether it's cloud. I mean, most of the solutions are coming out of technology. So I mean, Eric, if you had to pick one solution, technology trend which will take us out of COVID,
I think the big thing is the availability to data. You've got to be available from core edge and cloud. Hybrid cloud, even if you don't have an edge, is about availability of data. And at the actual storage system level, the availability, whether it's 5 nines, 6 nines, 7 nines of availability. How do you handle failure modes? How do you keep the end user up and going at all times? So I do think that the availability of data is a critical theme that involves not just hybrid cloud technology, but literally the actual base storage technology itself, to make sure that things are always up and running. If everyone's going through this digital transformation, and even if you get to people going back to work, right, in a physical entity, the bottom line is this availability of keeping your system up and running and always resilient is a critical entity. So this data availability across core edge and cloud, hybrid cloud only if you don't have an edge, and of course the actual system level products itself, I think is a critical trend that's not going to change whether COVID stays as bad as it is or COVID goes away. It's still going to be there, because now the bar's been raised. The standard is now higher. So it used to be down here, and that was good enough. Now it's gone this way because of COVID, and people are going to get used to it. They're going to say, wait, I don't want to go back to 4 nines of availability on a system. I paid X amount of money for this, and it was 6 nines. Now you're telling me I'm going to pay X amount, same amount, but I only get 4 nines? Why would I do that? So I think that whether it be hybrid cloud or whether it be base availability on a system level, that this availability of data theme is something that's not going to change with COVID, whether it goes away or whether it persists for the next couple of years.